Hello and welcome to season 2 of Culture in Between, a podcast all about exploring the unique experiences of people who grew up in a culture outside of their parents' culture. We are your hosts, Alyssa and Brianna, and in today's episode, it's actually just the two of us. A little bit of a different venue here. Usually we have a guest and we're interviewing and they're being showcased, but today it's just Brianna and me. As we embark on season 2, this might be a new trend that we kind of start where Brianna and I just kind of talk about different topics, and we are dubbing today's episode as Book Club. Brianna came up with the idea, and it might be something we do in the future. We'll see. But Book Club, why don't you tell them, Bri, what it's about?
Oh, okay. Put me on the spot.
I did.
Okay.
It's your idea, so I want to give
Yeah.
you.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. So I love books. I am
She's
an
always been a
avid
reader.
reader. Yeah. So I just thought, like, how cool would it be to maybe have like a culture in between book club where we feature books that kind of revolve around our same theme of people who grew up with immigrant parents. um I just think that it just gives people another resource to or resources to go to if they want to learn more about this topic and about kind of the themes that we discuss on this podcast. So that's what I thought. Just my love of books and my desire to for people to hear about these great books that talk about this topic. If
Yeah.
you're listening to this podcast and you might be interested in this topic, so I figure why not read some books about it.
Yeah, and today we'll actually be covering 5 books, all ranging with authors from different backgrounds. And Brandon will kind of cover 3, and I'll cover 2 books, and then yeah, we'll just kind of dive in. We're gonna cover some kind of main themes. We'll kind of tell you the genre of the book, the basic plot of the book, also the cultural themes. Let's see, our favorite moment of the book, our favorite quote in the book. I'm probably missing some other things, Bree.
No,
I
I
don't
think
know, but I
that's
think
pretty
that's
much
yeah,
it.
that's kind of the general. That's kind of the general gist we'll give you about each book. So it's just kind of like a review, and then yeah, we'll kind of share in the show notes where you can kind of go read them. So yeah, just kind of a different theme, and we thought maybe our audience would like it, and yeah, learn something new.
Hmm.
So I think Brian is actually going to kick us off.
Oh yes, I am. So the first book we would like to review today is Crying in H Mart. So, Crying in H Mart was written by Michelle Zauner, who is the lead singer of a band called Japanese Breakfast, which you may or may not know. But it's not important to know who she is in order to enjoy this book. Actually, I didn't know who she was before I started reading it. She's also just a really great writer, actually. And Crying in H Mart actually did really well. It was a New York Times bestseller. And the book sort of revolves around a time in Michelle's life when she acted as a caregiver for her mother, who had a late stage pancreatic cancer. And her mother was Korean. Her father is Jewish American. And I know that sounds really depressing to think about a book about the last days of this woman's mother, but Michelle does a really great job of actually keeping it fairly lighthearted. Obviously, she does deal with really serious themes surrounding the loss of a loved one and all of the pain that she went through during that time, but she also does a great job of just throwing in jokes and going back to her childhood, and just it's really mostly a book about the evolution of her relationship with her mother, which is really interesting because obviously her, as I said, her mother was Korean, and there was definitely a lot of culture clash between Michelle and her mom, and she explores that really keenly in the book. And so I personally really loved it. It is very much a very personal memoir. Um, some of the main themes that Michelle kind of goes into in the book uh, is her loss of identity, kind of, or especially her Korean identity, uh, kind of not even before her mother's death. She kind of started to feel like, wow, if I lose my mother, am I even Korean anymore? Is kind of something that she brings up in the book, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Is that she really felt like it was only her mother who was tying her to her Korean side, and she felt like, wow, if I lose my mother, what is even making me Korean anymore. I feel like I've lost a whole half of myself. And that kind of leads into another big theme in the book, which is food. Um, so, how Michelle kind of tries to remedy that feeling of loss, or the void of her Korean identity, is by kind of exploring Korean food and learning how to make a lot of different Korean foods for her mother, and even after her mother's death, for herself. Um, there actually are still videos on YouTube of Michelle making Korean dishes and talking about the book, which I encourage you to check out. Um, and so you'll hear about a lot of different Korean foods in this book, which is really cool. Um, and it was just a way for Michelle to kind of feel more close to her culture. I think that was a really interesting idea, to kind of delve into food in that way. Um, as I mentioned before, Michelle is also mixed race. Obviously, she's half Jewish, half Korean. So that was also kind of a source of contention for her. As she could kind of pass as not being fully Asian. So she really, when she was growing up, she talks about, not wanting to stand out. She grew up in Eugene, Oregon, which, at least at the time that she was growing up there, was not very diverse. So she was one of the few Asian people in her school or in her community. And so she really wanted to just be seen as white and not Korean at all, really, growing up. And then, so it's interesting seeing that evolution of her as an adult, now wanting to embrace her Korean side more. So again, it explores a lot of the themes that we kind of cover in this podcast in general. um and so, yeah, so those are the kind of the main cultural themes from Crying in H Mart. My favorite moment in the book, it might seem kind of insignificant actually, but I loved it because I related to it, and it happens really early in the book. When Michelle is kind of first introducing us to her mother and her relationship with her mother. And Michelle describes a time when she was very young, when I think she like fell out of a tree, or she somehow she hurt herself.
Wow.
Yeah, she somehow hurt
That could be a
herself
serious injury.
in the,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, something like, she felt somehow hurt herself outside.
Okay.
And her mother comes running and like sees her, and she's like crying and hurt and like bleeding, and her mother like gets upset with her for like hurting herself, and doesn't even really like show her any sympathy that she's like in pain. And Michelle kind of describes that as like, she feels like her white friends, or her just American friends, their mothers, like if they saw them hurt, they would like take them to the hospital and be like, oh my gosh, like, are you okay, like,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, and blah blah. And like her mom was there like being upset with her. And Michelle actually describes in the book that it was almost like her mother saw her getting hurt as like an affront to herself, to her mother herself, as if like Michelle was like an extension of her. And I thought that was kind of an interesting observation. And I just really related to that because I think that's the same way my mom would react. I mean, like, I was never a very like adventurous child, so I
This
don't
is
think I
true.
ever really, yeah. I mean, I'm sure I did hurt myself at some point, but I
Brianna's one of
don't.
the least athletic people I think I know.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll get into
I'm
that
sorry.
one day, I'm
She's always
sure.
loved to read.
Yeah. Yeah, I just like to read, and you can't hurt yourself reading
True.
generally. So, yeah. So my mom, I don't remember a time when my mom got mad at me in that way for hurting myself, but I feel like there have been instances where something similar has happened, and she gets upset when probably non-immigrant parents would not, and would show you a little more sympathy or empathy. So I just thought that was an interesting moment early on in the book that uh helped me really relate to it, and solidify that this was something that I was gonna enjoy. um so I want to go into my favorite quote.
Going into the book. All right.
Yes, so
Didn't
let's
even
go
write it.
into the book. So this again is very early on into the book. Let me see if I can find it here. Okay, yeah, it's just kind of yeah, very early on. And here she says, within 5 years, I lost both my aunt and my mother to cancer. So, when I go to H Mart, I'm not just on the hunt for cuttlefish and 3 bunches of scallions for $1. I'm searching for memories. I'm collecting the evidence that the Korean half of my identity didn't die when they did. H Mart is the bridge that guides me away from the memories that haunt me of chemo head and skeletal bodies and logging milligrams of hydrocodone. It reminds me of who they were before, beautiful and full of life, wiggling Changgu honey cracker rings on all 10 of their fingers, showing me how to suck a Korean grape from its skin and spit out the seeds. So yeah. So like I said,
Nice.
that kind of just explores like kind of her search in the book for her identity and what it means after her mother's death, and it leads us back to why she was an H Mart, which you'll
Mm.
hear about in the first chapter of the book if you read it. Um,
It's a
and
great title for a book.
it's all
Yeah,
yeah. I
it's
was
definitely
just
eye
about to
catching.
say
It's
that.
funny. It's kind of yeah.
I was just about to say that. I think that's actually what drew me to the book first. Was
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even actually ignorantly, I didn't really even know what H Mart was. I was like, crying in H Mart just sounds like such a cool name. And then I learned that it was like a, or not just Korean, but kind of
Mm-hmm.
Asian
I think so. Yeah.
supermarket. And I thought that was really cool. And yeah, and it is a great book. And I hope you all read it. That's my little review.
And the second book we'll be covering is titled Yinka, Where is Your Husband? It's a fictional book and is a debut novel by Lizzie Damilola Blackburn. It's a story centered around the life of Yinka, a 30 something British Nigerian woman who is smart, career focused, and single, a status that her family is eager to change and continually reminds her about. The plot is centered around Yinka's struggle with the societal and familial pressures to find a husband and settle down, which is a constant topic of discussion among her relatives, especially as she attends various family events and weddings. When the book begins, Yinka feels increasingly left out and pressured as her younger cousin gets engaged and her aunt bluntly asks her, Yinka, where is your husband? This question becomes a recurring theme, highlighting the intense pressure on Yinka to conform to cultural expectations of marriage. Motivated partly by the desire to stop the incessant questions about her single status and partly by her own internal conflict about being single, Yinka sets out on a mission to find a boyfriend by the time her cousin's wedding is scheduled. Yinka's quest leads her through a series of very awkward dates and interactions as she navigates the dating scene. Throughout her journey, Yinka also wrestles with her identity, the expectations of her Nigerian family, and her own desires for her life, including her faith and career. Alongside her quest for love, Yinka's story is also about self discovery and empowerment. She learns to balance her dual cultural identities, to stand up for herself, and to redefine what happiness means to her, independently of her relationship status. So they're kind of a lot of cultural themes, but the two I'll talk about here one is colorism, because throughout the book, Yinka has a constant feeling of not being beautiful. One of them attributed to the fact that she's not light skinned. At one point, she almost purchases lightening cream to try and change her natural skin color. And some non minorities might not be aware or understand that there is colorism or favoritism for certain shades of skin. This is extremely unfortunate, and I wish we could change the narrative so that people of all shades would feel beautiful. But this is something that Yinka does touch on in the book. Another theme is family dynamics and community. The importance of family and the wider community is another prominent theme. Yinka's interactions with her extended family and their involvement in her personal life depict where family members often have a significant say, or at least an opinion, in personal matters like marriage, much to her chagrin. One of my favorite moments was when Yinka finds her way at the end of the book. For most of the novel, she's trying to adhere to the beauty standards that she thinks others expect of her and the job standards that she thinks her family demands of her. And it's refreshing when Yinka finally accepts herself for who she is and finds happiness in that, finally pursuing the things she's passionate about instead of trying to live the life of someone else. And my favorite quote is can't think it's like in the middle of the book, can't remember. I wrote it down here, but it says, I realize how freeing it is to say what I think, to stand up for myself. I realize how much less of an effort it is to be my authentic self as opposed to trying to be someone else. I love this feeling. I love this Yinka. I can get used to her.
Yeah, yeah. I loved Yinka, Where's Your
Oh yeah,
Husband?
the intro of the
I
book.
also
Brianna recommended the book to me, so
Yeah, so those who are just listening, I'm holding the book up now.
hmm
It has a beautiful cover, very colorful and cool, and it's kind of like it's supposed to be, I guess, Yinka and like her all her
aunts
family
and yeah,
coming out of
cousins.
her head, wearing like a traditional dress and everything. But anyway, yeah, I loved Yinka, Where Is Your Husband as well, and I actually recommended it to
hmm
Alyssa. And if you're looking for it, do know that the book spells husband with a Z
Yeah.
to kind of imitate, I guess, the Nigerian accent and how her mother would have said it, which I thought was clever and very cute. And yeah, and it's a
Yeah.
very nice read. It's not short, but I feel like it went by really fast. It was
Yeah.
pretty quick
I
to
read it pretty
read.
quickly. Like,
Yeah, it really
hmm
moves along, and you really fall in love with the characters. I think the author does a great job of kind of fleshing out all of the characters.
yeah,
So,
it's very relatable. I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, feeling like you have to kind of fit this mold and everything. And so, yeah, it was a good read for sure.
mhm. The next book we are going to talk about is called Brit-ish. And Brit-ish was written by Afua Hirsch, who is a pretty well known, I believe, kind of television personality. And she was a lawyer at one time, and she worked for the BBC, I believe. She was a journalist, and in the UK. And I say British, that I say the title that way because
Like, describe how it's spelled for those on the
yes,
podcast.
because the way that she has the title spelled is it literally is Brit all by itself, and then ish is in parentheses. And as you can probably guess, that's to sort of portray this feeling of not being fully British, but being like only a little bit British or half British. And that is really the main theme of the book is Afua talks a lot about not feeling fully British herself, and she kind of explores what it means to be British. So this book is interesting. Like I mentioned, Afua is a journalist first and foremost, and so it's not just it is a nonfiction book, and it's semi autobiographical, but she also kind of does research and kind of does almost like field pieces where she kind of does her own like like actual research on the job on the field, of different themes that she explores in the book. And it's really interesting because you're not just getting her take on everything, you're also getting kind of just a more broader view of other stories and other things that have happened surrounding race and identity in the UK. So if you're an Anglophile like me, I think this is a great book to read, because you'll learn a lot about how these themes are in the UK. I mean, I think especially with this podcast right now, we've mostly talked to American people and seen the American view of what it's like to grow up with immigrant parents here in the US. But they have some of the same issues and takes on things in the UK as well. So it's just an interesting take on that. Uh, and so the book is kind of divided into a variety of like topics or categories. I'll just go through some of them. Her first chapter is called "Where Are You From?", which is a question that we talk about a
hmm
lot in this podcast, and so she kind of delves into that question, how she feels about it, and what does it really mean, which I found really interesting. She has another chapter called "Origins," one called "Bodies," "Heritage," "Class." So these are all different themes that she explores in the book. Um, and I think some of the main cultural themes that I really took away were Afua is mixed race. So her mother is Ghanaian and her father is like British, like white British, but like he has like some German descent. Um, and so it's kind of interesting to hear her talk about being mixed race and being really kind of confused about what she really was, because she grew up similar to a past book that we talked about, Crying in H Mart. She grew up with in a non-diverse environment in Wimbledon in London.
Ooh,
Yeah, yeah,
love the
Wimbledon.
tournament. Love the tennis
Wimbledon,
tournament.
yeah, I think
That's cool. I didn't
we
know people
know
actually
Wimbledon.
live there.
Yeah, we know Wimbledon for the tennis tournament, but
hmm
it also is an actual community where people live. And at least at the time that Afua was living there, it was not very diverse, and so she often felt very othered there. She actually did experience pretty overt racism growing up, which was
It's
really sad
unfortunate.
to
Yeah.
hear. And so she goes into that quite a bit in the book. And she really lost her sense of place, and she just wasn't sure really where she belonged, and that led to her feeling like she wasn't fully British, and that she must be more African, and she probably will feel more at home there, and that leads her to actually move there shortly after college. And she goes into that a lot. I'll talk about that a little bit later because that goes into like my favorite moment. But yeah, so that's a major theme, is being mixed race, dealing with racism, um, uh, moving to her heritage country, which is something that we haven't really talked about yet. But that I thought that was a really interesting part in the book. She actually moves on two different occasions to Africa, to two different countries within Africa, to sort of just find where she belongs. And obviously, that can be complicated, as we have talked about. Sometimes, just because some place is your heritage country, it's not necessarily where you belong or where you feel most
Mhm.
comfortable. So Afua kind of finds that out. And yeah, so those are some of the main cultural themes that she kind of explores within this book. So as I said, I think my favorite moment is one of the times when she moves to Africa. So she actually moves to Africa once when she is fresh out of college, and she gets a job there in Senegal, which is not where she's from, not where her mother is from or her family is from. But she figures like, oh, I'm in Africa. Like I'll feel more
It was my
like I
roots.
belong
Yeah.
here. Like people will accept me more. And she actually, she hasn't. I think it's a good experience for her, and I think she is happy that she did it. But it ends up leaving her with more questions than answers, actually, because she finds that actually some of her Senegalese coworkers kind of take advantage of her for being like the foreigner who will like give them money and things. And she just finds that people actually kind of treat her like a foreigner and like an outsider. And that's very disorienting for her at that young age. And she kind of comes back to the UK wondering why that didn't work out, and why she actually feels more at home in the UK when she has never really felt at home in the UK. And that's kind of actually where she starts the book. And she it's not a completely narrative book, so she kind of jumps around, but it's also that's actually kind of where she starts in the book, is from that place of how she felt when she first came back to the UK after living in Senegal for a while. But my favorite moment is actually the second time she moves to Africa. She actually does move to Ghana, and at this point she's a little bit older. She has a partner and a daughter. And she moves to Ghana thinking that this is going to be a permanent move, and she's going to like, Senegal didn't work out because it wasn't Ghana. It wasn't where her
Mm.
roots were really from. And so now she's moving to Ghana, and she's like gonna be where her roots are. But of course, she moved there, and again she um, found that it wasn't quite as much home as she had hoped it would be. And kind of her idealistic expectations of moving there and just being like fully embraced by the community and blending in didn't quite happen. And she talks about even having to like learn the language, and her partner was actually better at learning the language than her. He's also of Ghanaian descent, and she talked about how weird that was. And she a really interesting part, which is not my favorite moment, but is just interesting, is that she had a very harrowing experience where her and her partner were actually attacked on a beach in Ghana. And that was kind of one of the last straws for her, of really realizing that she didn't belong there. And that it actually could be dangerous. How much,
Mm.
and that, at the end of the day, she was seen as a foreigner, to the point where she wasn't even fully safe there. So it was interesting. It was really interesting to hear about that, to hear someone try and go back to their heritage country, uh, and find that it wasn't all that they thought it was going to be. So I found that really interesting about the book. My favorite quote I'm actually going to read is kind of from the aftermath of her move to Ghana, where she kind of reflects on that time. So I'm gonna read about that. So she says, "Nevertheless, I can't help but reflect on the lengths I've gone to in the search for an identity that would allow the two sides of my heritage, British and Ghanaian, to peacefully coexist. I am proud of my African heritage. It has shaped me, given me a history, and a sense of continuity that enriches the contours of my world. At the same time, I really am very British, as Ghanaians have often taken great pains to point out." That's it. And I highly recommend British, especially if you are an anglophile like myself, or you just want to explore what it's like to have immigrant parents in a different country, and with different dynamics. So I highly recommend it.
The fourth book we're going to cover is titled We Were Dreamers, an Immigrant Superhero Origin Story by Simu Liu, who you may know as the lead actor in Marvel's Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. So this is a memoir by Simu, and the book consists of 3 acts, and I love that the acting theme has carried out in how he structured the book. Um, but Act 1 was all about Simu's family and upbringing in China. He starts off by depicting his memories and experiences of his childhood growing up in China, raised predominantly by his grandparents. The remainder of this first act tells a tale of his parents and their upbringing in China. It covers the hardships that his parents faced as individuals and as parents when they made the very difficult decision to leave their son for a period of time in hopes of forging a better life for their family. We also learn of his parents' academic prowess and giftedness, a trait that would ultimately bring his parents together when they met at college. Overall, this act does a great job of providing a backstory of his parents and provides some context on some of the behavior and events that occur throughout the rest of the book. Simu actually says, like, I think before the act begins, like, hey, you can technically like skip this section or whatever. But he's like, this is really important because it'll make sense, kind of like why my parents are the way they are. So I thought that was kind of funny. He's kind of like, you can skip it, but don't. So yeah, that kind of sets you up and kind of I think gives a foundation as to maybe why some of the events take place later on in the book. So so that's Act 1, and Act 2 kind of goes into Simu's life moving from China to Canada, and it covers the trials and tribulations of assimilating to a new country and adjusting to actually having his parents be his official guardians because as I mentioned in Act 1, his parents had actually left to forge a better life, and so they made the tough decision to kind of leave him with his grandparents. And I think up until the age I think he migrated at the age of like 4. So up until the age of 4, he was raised pretty much predominantly by his grandparents, and so um, it was his parents almost felt foreign to him. He kind of depicts um, how he like when they kind of came back and were like, hey, we're going to be taking you to to Canada, like he was kind of like he didn't like almost didn't even feel comfortable around his dad. So that was kind of very interesting. And it shows and how he really loved his life in China and didn't really want to leave. This act is really sort of Simu's coming of age section and depicts the events in his life from like being a kid throughout his college years. And a majority of the act actually covers the tumultuous relationship he had with his parents, where he endured both emotional and physical abuse. And it captures his efforts to fit in and assimilate, the academic pressures from his parents, and then the initial career path that he took in accounting. And then Act 3 is the third and final act, and it's about Simu's life after being laid off as an accountant. It's kind of like the section right before Simu as we know him today. Um, this act also covers Simu's journey into the world of acting and entertainment. It details his struggles as an actor and his eventual breakthrough roles in television and film, culminating in his casting as the lead in Marvel's Shang-Chi. This section is not only about his success, but also reflects his coming to terms with his past and making amends with his parents. And so, the cultural themes I'll kind of touch on. I think I'll touch on 2 here. Is the first one is that the immigrant dream and the pursuit of success. So the book embodies the immigrant dream of seeking a better life and the relentless pursuit of success in a new country. Simu's shift from a stable job in accounting to an uncertain Simu's shift from a stable job in accounting to an uncertain acting career symbolizes the pursuit of personal fulfillment over traditional measures of success. A narrative that's very common among second generation Americans, and is something that Brianna and I have talked about. How we both were in the arts. Brianna actually pursued it as a career. I did not. I decided I wanted it to be a hobby. But yeah, kind of that, like, okay, do you choose your passion, or what kind of is the thing that your immigrant parent will be proud of, right? We talk about the doctor, a lawyer, engineer, those kind of things. So Simu chose accounting as kind of his, I guess, stable path. And then he was like miserable in it. And so yeah, that's kind of a theme that was covered. And so the next theme that I'll kind of discuss here is meeting parental expectations. The memoir delves deeply into the high expectations set by immigrant parents who often sacrifice a great deal to provide their children with opportunities in a new country. So Simu's relationship with his parents is a central aspect of his story and conveys the innate indebtedness that many children of immigrants grapple with. I know I grapple with this a lot. I'm sure Brianna does too. Especially when you have parents who come from a developing country. You are, you know, you hear those like cliches where it's like, I had to walk a mile both ways, with a camel on my back. Whatever. I don't know. Not I don't know. I had to walk, both ways of like carrying 10 books or whatever. And so our parents, or like walk through the snow. Or our parents from Jamaica, so no snow there. But like we did hear stories of them having to walk and do all these things, and it's like, as a child growing up in a first world country, like how do you compete with that, right? So you kind of feel this like, okay, mom and dad, or sacrifice so much for us, how do we live up to it? And so you naturally, as I said, this innate indebtedness to kind of um, live up to what they want for you, because you don't want what they did for you to be in vain. But you also uh, struggle with like, okay, but what about what I want, and finding that kind of balance. So yeah, it's cultural common theme that we've discussed here, and then Simu touched on it as well. So I think my favorite moment was the culmination of just the whole story. I first heard about Simu after watching Shang-Chi and seeing Simu portray Marvel's first Asian superhero. It was really inspiring, and I love that we're finally getting more Asian representation in these types of films. Simu's story was just so interesting to read about, and I resonated a lot with some of the depictions from his childhood. It's like, although we had like vastly different experiences, I too struggled to live up to my parents' expectations of me, and trying to fit in as I navigated the world between my Jamaican and American heritage. Um, I was also excited to read this book because I purchased a Kindle edition and then the audio version of the book, because I wanted to hear the story through Simu's voice. Like, hearing the emotion and the inflections in his voice made the story come alive and made the reading experience that much more enjoyable. Especially, there's a lot of like Mandarin in the book, and or like especially how he talks about how he pronouncing his grandparents' last name and all that, and just little there's a lot of like I said, Mandarin just kind of sprinkled throughout, and you can really hear like when he refers to his grandma and grandpa. I'm not gonna say it because I'm gonna butcher it, but like the love in his voice. And even I don't know, maybe I think I picked this up at like when the few times kind of in the second act when his dad would kind of refer to him like lovingly, he would, I think, refer to him as a certain kind of like pet name. And so yeah, it's just those are things that you just, I guess, can't really get conveyed as much when you're just reading it. And so it was really neat to hear it through Simu's voice. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I intentionally bought the audiobook because I just really wanted to hear it that way. Like, seriously, it's a great read. I don't read very often. If you notice, Brianna's definitely the bookworm, and I don't read a ton. But like, I really, really love this book. And Simu, if you're watching this, we would love to have you on the podcast. Like, pretty please, like that would be amazing, and I would be so honored. At the very least, just want to say I loved the story. It was super amazing and just really great to read. I related to a lot of it, and I think a lot of people with immigrant parents would relate to as well, because even though he's depicting very like hard things that are happening, like literally physical abuse, guys, and some savage emotional abuse, I will say. I mean, he says it though like in a funny way. Like, I think he literally even said like, my mom was savage, like, and so I don't know, maybe he didn't, but like but like it was just depicted, like how he did it was kind of funny, even though it was very painful for him. And so I commend him for kind of being honest about that. So um I actually have two favorite quotes from the book. So the first one is, My parents worked hard to ensure that I was given every possible opportunity available to me. Never questioned that. But they had failed emphatically at creating a home environment that was safe for me, a place filled with warmth, physical affection, and unconditional support. So, um, I think, he's referring here to his emotional and physical abuse that he got at home. Even though they made a better opportunity for him. And although I didn't have, I would say I had some emotional abuse growing up, but like I hate to say that, but like yeah, I mean, you can kind of like that's kind of how I relate to it, I guess. I guess why that quote kind of stood out, because it's like you know, you do agree that your parents created this great opportunity for you, and they really tried to do everything so that you could have a better life than they did. But sometimes in trying to pursue that, the emotional or the nurturing that you need is not really there. So you have like maybe your physical needs and your stuff to just live, but like the emotional part is kind of neglected. So anyway, that was my first quote that I really liked. And the second quote is that says, "Your parents did not defy destiny and settle halfway around the world so you could live a miserable and empty life. They want you to be happy doing what you love. They just might not know it yet." And I thought that's just kind of a witty thing, kind of alluding to, again, trying to live up to your parents' expectations, whether they say it explicitly or it's just something that you kind of feel like you have to do. So I feel like those two kind of just conveyed two quotes that I really liked. Yeah, I really enjoyed the book. It's a great read, and I highly recommend it.
Okay, and for the very last book of our inaugural Culture in Between book club is called Fatty Fatty Boom Boom.
Great name.
Very funny name, I know. So Fatty Fatty Boom Boom was written by Rabia Chaudry. I really hope I pronounced that correctly. I tried to look up pronunciations and I heard some different ones. So, but anyway, Rabia Chaudry is, you might know her for her intense advocation of her childhood friend Adnan Syed, for him to be released from his murder conviction. And that actually served as the uh, subject of the first season of the very popular podcast Serial. So, so she is kind of the inspiration for the first season of Serial, which is pretty cool. Um, I personally am not into true crime
Me,
stories because
I'm
they
a
creep
scaredy
me
cat.
out. But
I know it's a very popular theme
yes,
or genre in podcasting.
but I just wanted to point that out because you may know Rabia from that. Um, and that with that being said, you don't need to know any background on Rabia in order to enjoy Fatty Fatty Boom Boom, because this book is not at all about her career or her work. It is actually just about her journey with her weight, which sounds like it has nothing to do with her culture, but it actually does have a lot to do with her culture. Fatty Fatty Boom Boom, as the name suggests, is about Rabia's struggle to lose weight, her struggle with being overweight. Um, she really goes through her whole life, pretty much from birth to now, and just all the different fluctuations her weight has taken over that time. And the way that it ties in with her culture is that um, she talks a lot about Pakistani food because her parents are both from Pakistan, and she actually was born there, but moved very early to the U.S. with her parents. So a lot of the food that she grows up eating is Pakistani food, and I didn't realize that there's actually a lot of like ghee butter and different ingredients in Pakistani food that aren't the healthiest. And she loaded up on that. But also, I think this will later tie into one of my favorite things about the book is that um, she makes a really interesting observation about how her parents, being immigrant parents, kind of actually led to her growing up with very unhealthy eating habits because her parents just weren't aware that American fast food and American packaged food could be so unhealthy for you. They just didn't know that when they first moved here. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. But yeah, so that actually kind of led to her having these unhealthy habits, and in part it because she was actually the first child in her family. She really bore the brunt of that because her younger sister and brother did not have the same issues with weight that she had, um, because her parents had kind of learned from their mistakes with her. uh, but yeah, so it's just interesting hearing her talk about that. I'd never really thought about that or explored that idea before. So that was an interesting aspect of the book. Um, Rabia also does a really great job of talking about her past trips to Pakistan, especially when she was younger. She just really describes them in such vivid detail. Um, in particular, there was a time when she describes a wedding. Her I believe it was her aunt's wedding in Pakistan, and just the customs surrounding it. And it's just so interesting. It was so interesting hearing that. I'm actually kind of skipping around. I think that was my favorite moment of the book was her describing just the events leading up to her aunt's wedding and her aunt's wedding. There's a lot of mishaps happened on the way to leading up to the wedding, and there were just cultural things that she didn't quite understand, like the fact that her aunt was really sad in the days leading up and just looked really like almost depressed and downtrodden. And apparently that is actually just a cultural custom in Pakistan when or surrounding weddings, that the bride is meant to be sad because she's leaving her family and joining another family. So that was interesting seeing it through Rabia's child's eyes, because she was a child at the time, and she was like, why? She's like, why is my aunt getting married if she's sad? Like, like this doesn't make sense. Aren't weddings supposed to be happy? So that was just really interesting. And just the way that the street culture in Pakistan is described just seems so lively and colorful, and so I really loved that about the book. So as it suggests, this is kind of like a memoir of Rabia's life. It does particularly focus on her journey with her weight, but it also explores her life at large as well, and her marriages, her just the experiences in school, and her interactions with her family. That's really the core of the book, I feel like, is her interactions with her family. And that's how the name of the book comes about. Fatty Fatty Boom Boom is that some of her family members call her that when she goes
Really?
back to Pakistan. Yeah. um,
Oh, that's funny.
which
Oh
is
no, I don't know.
another.
That's not. I guess that's
Yeah,
kind of
but that's
hurtful.
that's kind of, I related to that in a way, not because anyone's called me that, but because like I grew up in a Jamaican family that has like no filter, and like they just, that's like the first thing that they talk about is your weight. When they like when you see
Very
Jamaican
true.
family that you haven't seen in a while, they'll be like, "Oh, you gained weight." Like
Mm-hmm.
that's like the first thing that they
Put on weight.
notice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it's funny hearing that it's kind of similar for her and in a Pakistani family, that like that they just freely comment on her weight and her parents' weight. And like, talk about how like, oh, you in America, you must be like eating really well, like, and they just freely say it,
Mm.
and are just really upfront about it, and I relate to that because I
Common
just,
theme is like unsolicited
yeah, just
comments about people. Yeah.
unsolicited comments on your weight and
Or
things that,
appearance and yeah.
on your appearance. Yeah, it was just so it was really funny to hear her talk about that. There's a really funny moment in the book where again, this is that when she was in Pakistan for her aunt's wedding, and her aunt took her out to go get some street food, and they um or were trying to catch a bus, and at one point like her and her aunt kind of got lost from each other trying to get onto this bus, and her aunt was worried that she had actually left Rabia outside the bus, and so she was like frantically searching for her. And there's a man on the bus who says, "Don't worry, your baby buffalo made it."
Oh
He says
no.
it in like Urdu, or one of the Pakistani languages, and she describes it in the book, and it's just hilarious. It's just really funny. And so yeah, so I think this book is a great mix of just lightheartedness and funniness, and even though it is dealing with a serious topic of dealing with your weight and self-image, um and I should say that Rabia also experienced some abuse in her first marriage that she goes into
Mm.
a little bit. I just want to put that out there. But overall, this book is very lighthearted mostly, and it deals with this topic in a very interesting and almost fun way, really. So that's what I loved about it. So yeah, so some of the main cultural themes are really just those customs that I talked about, like especially kind of customs surrounding weddings and marriage that she goes into. Um, Visiting family from abroad and kind of getting to see the culture through her family. She has a very large family back in Pakistan, and so it was so interesting to just see her perspective of things and yeah, and to see her experience that. She actually seemed to kind of feel more at ease there than I think a lot of times people feel when they go sometimes to their heritage country. I think maybe because she did go there a lot, or go for long periods of time when she was young. But also she was singled out for being kind of like the fat American kid, so there was that. But yeah, I think that's an interesting cultural theme there. And I think that relationship, like I said, between the immigrant experience and food, which maybe we don't always think about, but um, that idea of coming from a country that has one relationship with food, or one idea of what food is, and then coming to America, which is very different, where your food is oftentimes just more like an efficiency thing, and you just get
Mm.
you kind of easy to make food, and or easy to grab and food, and that's like not as much of a thing in Pakistan as it is in the US, and how that affected her weight is very interesting to read about. um so let's go straight into my favorite quote. So again, this is early in the book, when Rabia is talking about how,
I love that you have the quotes in the book. Like
yeah,
you're just, I
yeah,
wrote mine down, and you're like, let me. I'm going
yeah,
straight to
I
the book.
no, well, yeah, I like I love having books in my
That's
hand,
good.
so
Yeah,
it's
Brianna is
so
a
nice.
book purist, by the
Yeah,
way. Does not do on like e-readers or anything. She has to have a physical
no, I know.
copy. It's
Yeah,
all good.
I'm a
We each,
I'm
we
a
each have our thing.
I'm a book purist or whatever. Yeah. So I want to read, it's kind of a longer passage, but I just want to read it because I think it kind of encapsulates how it all started for Rabia in her journey with bad eating habits. So I'll start here. So let's see, let me find it. Okay, here we are. Uh, Never could my parents have conceived of a country where you could get an entire meal, greasy, hot, and ready, without ever even having to get out of the car. They were overwhelmed by the supermarkets, the fast food, the restaurants, the thousands of kinds of snacks and sodas and juices and desserts, all cheap and easily available. They'd never seen this many kinds of cookies and chips, cereals and breads, prepackaged meat that you didn't have to go to pick up every day from the local butcher, rows and rows of fruit and vegetables from around the world, both in season and out of season, all in one place. The sheer abundance was a promise fulfilled. By the time we flew back to see the family and loved ones my parents desperately missed, all three of us looked like before pictures in weight loss stories, and no one in Pakistan would let them forget it. So that's just a taste of Rabia's writing, and yeah, I really think you all would enjoy this book if you're looking for something kind of lighter, and just kind of an interesting take on a
Mhm.
cultural experience. So yeah, so I highly recommend it.
A lot of the books you covered had very cheeky titles, I feel like. Very nice. Yeah. This is a newer thing we're kind of experimenting with, this whole book club concept, and we hope you like it. It's been fun for us to kind of read these books and write down these main topics that we discussed, and yeah, we probably maybe we'll do another 5 the next season or the season after that or whatever. But yeah, I hope you enjoy this kind of different theme. Get to hear Brianna and my voice a little bit more. We will share links to all the books in the show notes, like I mentioned at the start of the show. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, happy reading.
Happy reading. Bye.
Bye.